Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from multiple quarantine zones in Brooklyn and New York City with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Theoretician David Griscom.
How's it going?
On this week's program, it's going all right. On this week's program, Vijay Prashad of the Tricontinental Institute. We're talking about the global picture. Hybrid wars, the state of the non-aligned movement in 2020. What does that mean in U.S. hyper empire? The uprisings, the relation between them and capital, corporate hegemony, and also why Vijay deeply admires Ho Chi Minh and the success of Kerala in dealing with the COVID crisis, potentially lessons for the globe. Then Stavros, Halkias, am I right in that, Matt? Stavros, our buddy from, and I'll just say CT. No, I'm just playing. I apologize. I'm going to ask him how his parents felt when it came out that he was hosting a show called Come Town. But he's a very, very, very funny man, and we are going to be talking about why we are missing basketball, but at least I am totally sketched out about how basketball is reopening. That's insane. I've been listening to that on Hoops Adjacent with Waz and David Aldridge. Yeah,
Stav also does, I had it when I was going to say, Stavi solves your problems on Twitch.
Well, that's what we're, Stavi solves your problems on Twitch. So we're actually in the post game. He's going to stick around for some of the post game, and we have some advice questions from some TMBS patrons. So we're going to do that. We're going to have a lot of fun with Stav. People need some fun. Looking forward to that. Of course, we got a gem. David, what's cooking on the gem?
So we're going to be talking about the upcoming eviction crisis and why we need a moratorium on rent and rent assistance right now.
Absolutely. Way past due. In the post game, the movement for socialism is surging in the polls in Bolivia, but will the coup regime allow a proper election to take place? Plus, other political warfare taking place in coup Bolivia. Leaders from Latin America sign a letter condemning Israel's apartheid moves. Ronnie Kasril's on the Freedom Charter and the ANC, lessons for our moment. John McDonnell puts out a statement in solidarity with the Uyghur population in China. We'll talk about that and share his solidarity. Plus, a debunk with Ben Burgess. The Ayn Rand Institute is very cozy with some bailout funds. We've also got some news from Greece, the return of the technocracy or no. And so many of you, even though I admit to being pretty sick of it, although I always end up getting amused when we do it, but so many of you have said that a little bit of Dave Rubin comedy is helping you in these pandemic depression times. And when Dave Rubin says that he wants to be treated like an adult and then illustrates that he wants to be treated like an adult by talking about G.I. Joe, it's going to make the cut. And we're going to talk about it in the postgame. Also, Donald Trump's mega stupid re-election campaign, why beating him matters, all that and much, much more on the Michael Brooks Show. But first, let's talk about the Middle East, where Israel is continuing its plans to moving forward with annexation in the West Bank. Now, historically, and it has been the case since, of course, the late 60s, since the 67 war, Israel has engaged in an ongoing occupation in the West Bank. They withdrew from Gaza and the Sharon area, but of course that was not substantive. In fact, they maintained a brutal siege on Gaza and with periodic high-intensity bombing campaigns that were condemned almost uniformly across the world besides the United States. Even former Tory Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, correctly called Gaza an open-air prison. And even as the repression has continued and the so-called peace process has been discredited, the closest that Israel actually came to making any type of legitimate two-state solution deal was in the waning days of the Ehud Olmert administration, not the 2000 negotiations with Arafat was incorrectly solely blamed for and smeared by US leaders. So even as that has happened, Israel internally has progressed further and further to the extreme right under the Netanyahu government and various coalitions with parties that are said to represent the center, but of course just representing more polite face of Israeli repression of Palestinians, as well as other extreme right-wing settler and religious parties. And now Netanyahu is moving forward formally with annexing 30% of the West Bank. And this is in accordance, don't forget, with the Trump plan. Mike Pompeo stated last year that the Trump administration does not find any Israeli settlements to be in violation of international law. Now, the United States, of course, always, no matter what, firmly and staunchly supported Israel, but previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, had actually politely made clear that, of course, these settlements are a violation of international law and make it physically, logistically impossible for any type of equitable peace settlement. This has been the geographic reality for some time. And even as the brutality has continued, now Netanyahu has found renewed political life, even under serious corruption investigations and an erosion of the already profoundly limited Israeli democracy under his leadership in fully embracing an overt apartheid regimen. Not only will annexation mean an increase in Israeli-controlled land, but the proposed maps would sequester Palestinian communities so that they're surrounded by Israeli-controlled lands, meaning travel from place to place would be completely controlled by Israel, which, of course, it already is in many parts of the West Bank, including things that could come out of another era entirely, such as racially segregated or ethnically segregated roads. Here is a brief excerpt from a film, The Truth About Annexation, put out by the pro-peace Israeli fund, New Israel Fund.
What happens to private Palestinian land?
Sounds off.
What happens to private Palestinian lands in the annexed area? Are they expropriated? And what about the Palestinians that live in communities that Israel doesn't recognize? Do they become illegal aliens on their lands?
מפת הסיפוח ככל הנראה תכלול הרבה מאוד שטח וכמה שפחות פלסטינים שהם יישארו בעצם מחוץ לשטח המסופח, אבל הם יהיו מוקפים מכל עבריהם בישראל הריבונית. והדבר הזה מזכיר מאוד את המדיניות של דרום אפריקה בתקופת האפרטהייד. לדחוק את השחורים אל עבר שמורות ולהגיד לעולם זה מדינות, הם אזרחים של המדינות האלה. ככה אנחנו דוחקים את הפלסטינים לאזורים הבנויים שלהם ואומרים לעולם זה מדינה, לכן זה לא אפרטהייד. לא. כך נראה גם האפרטהייד המקורי.
And by the way, just if you're listening to this on podcast, that's an analyst making clear the very overt parallels between South Africa and 2020, apartheid South Africa and 2020 Israel-Palestine. Those analogies, if you don't like them, it should be clear, were originally made by people like Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, who explicitly connected those struggles. This is former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert asking a more practical and political question. Why now? On Fareed Zakaria on CNN.
Does this have something to do with his relationship with Trump, with the November elections? What are your thoughts?
I think, quite frankly, that if he does this, what it reflects in my mind is a growing concern on the side of Netanyahu that Trump will not be re-elected. Everyone says that this is an opportunity for us because Trump supports Israel. But if Netanyahu is confident that Trump will be re-elected, why hurry up now? Why not wait until after the elections, and then, while Trump is president and being re-elected, he can coordinate it with the Americans. The feeling that he hurries up is because he may not be confident that Trump will be re-elected. I think that this is unfortunately, in 2012, the Israeli Prime Minister was very much involved in what appeared to be an attempt to support the then Republican candidate Mitt Romney.
So what you have there is the former Prime Minister Olmert, who, in addition to committing significant war crimes in Gaza, was the last and maybe actually only prime minister that, at least proposal-wise and consistently rhetoric-wise, has been serious about not a full binational democracy, but a genuine two-state 67 border solution, which no other, including Barak, if you look at the substance of what he ordered, yes, he did make withdrawals in the late 90s, but the ultimate deal that was presented to Arafat in the waning days of the Clinton administration would not be tenable for any Palestinian leadership. And Olmert has coupled this criticism with an increasingly harsh attack on Netanyahu's leadership. But in many respects, Olmert is sort of a man of another time, when Israel was concerned about bipartisan support and presenting a brand of liberalism, even as it repressed Palestinians. Now, there's been attempts to confuse the issue. Netanyahu has claimed that annexation could begin on July 1st. Apparently has not begun yet, but the date went without policy announcement from the government, leading to speculation about possible pressure against this move from the United States. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, among others, have expressed their opposition to annexation. However, just because annexation did not occur on July 1st does not mean it's going away. The forces that have kept Netanyahu in power are still politically strong, and the slow ebbing of Palestinian land may be easier to achieve than a large-scale annexation. In fact, this would reflect decades of land theft from the Palestinian people. So much of this plan depends on this Trump administration, and it is very likely that Netanyahu will try to secure as much of that as possible, as Olmert pointed, before a potential Joe Biden administration. However, can we expect any type of real shift from Biden? Very unlikely.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we're all pushing it and making as clear what's happening with annexation and the slow ebb, as you were just mentioning. I think it's really important for people to understand too how serious the division of land, being basically separating communities from one another, is devastating to families and communities. It obviously devastates your economic opportunities. If you can't leave your village or your town without getting permission from Israel to do so, people really do get stranded in a country that's their own. They're unable to see family members for years at a time. I cannot remember the young boy's name, but there's plenty of stories of families who have a child born in one area who's not able to come back and live with their parents in another, just because they were born in the wrong part of Palestine. And it's something that is absolutely tragic. And I think that it's 100% right to use the words that Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela does. Apartheid, when you are separating people based on their background, that 100% is apartheid. When you have different rules and laws and regulations for different people, different religions and different ethnicities, that's apartheid. And, we have to, one, oppose it, but also in our context too, really push back against the Trump administration, because Trump has really opened up the door for Netanyahu to pursue a very, very aggressive policy that he might not have been able to, before. So,
yeah, and what I think is interesting, just as an outsider looking in, is how Israel chose this path, especially even really recently with when Netanyahu came and spoke to the Republican House. I remember having arguments about Israel, and none obviously as informed as on this show, but about, can you really, are they as right-wing as they look and things like that? And when he did that, it basically just confirmed, right? Netanyahu and what he represents is more in line with the Republican Party, regardless of what Obama tries to do. I don't know. It's sort of frightening that they threw all in on a party that at that point it looked like they were going to lose and stay outside of the executive branch for a long time. I don't know. It just seemed very, very strategic, and I don't know, concerning.
Not only is that true, but Israel is, in some ways, you could say, the global epicenter of the far right. I mean, Hungary is key. And at this point, it's globally it's proliferated globally. But if you actually even look at even some of the kind of early intellectual architecture of the sort of new ultra-nationalism that we see, some of that definitely comes from Israeli intellectuals. The sort of, formal turning away. And again, it's tricky because Israel was obviously, it was never a proper, fully secular democracy because there's identity boundaries around it. This is one of my core critiques of all identitarian formations at the end of the day, come from growing up around, at times, of horrific apologetics around Israel and so on. But definitely under Netanyahu and accelerating under the Obama era, there was a real emphasis on sort of turning to this kind of explicitly sort of neo-nationalistic politics. And this tracked with Israel, making common cause with extreme far-right, parties in Europe who, at least ancestrally would have been profoundly anti-Semitic, although of course now their sort of bigotry had turned to Islam. There's a book, it's by Yoram Hazany, and it's called The Virtue of Nationalism. And this book is the sort of, this is the kind of intellectual, the pop version you get from people like Bannon. So it's very, very important. You can't separate any variety of attacks on essentially pluralistic democracies and full substantive rights for minority populations that are occurring internationally, without the very specific contribution of the Israeli right to, again, justify into perpetuity governing millions of people that are not under any form of democratic legitimacy. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And, the real difference, rhetoric does matter. So even though, Barak's deal was ridiculous, there's obviously bigger claims that go back to the Nakba in 47. There's a lot of complexities here. But Olmert and Barak, particularly Olmert, consistently used the word apartheid. Israeli leaders used the word apartheid before that came to the United States, because the ones that had at least a buy-in to some sense of genuine, in the positive sense, liberal democracy, they saw this and they said, this isn't going to work. It's not even an ethical question. And what Netanyahu and others anticipated was that actually between the Republican Party, between some of the currents rising in Europe and elsewhere, including some real synergies with BJP in India, why not? Why couldn't this work? Yeah. And so that's a big question today. And I actually think, we'll talk about this more later, but I think one of the other problems with this, with the identitarian turn that Adolf Reed critiques, is that there are parallels coming from completely different places, but that there needs to be some baseline fight in the political realm about the idea of and practical expression of full rights and equity for all in a substantive way, because it is under siege. And the right side of it, a major part of it, is connected with groundwork that was laid politically and intellectually in Israel, completely inseparable from vicious sieges on Gaza and an apartheid situation in the West Bank.
I agree completely. I just wanted to add, like, on a personal sort of, there's a really amazing book by a writer, Morid Barghouti, that I highly suggest, called "I Was Born There, I Was Born Here," and it's about, he's Palestinian, and he's very much, it's about that kind of political struggle and what life is like. But it's very powerful because for Americans who are experiencing this sort of in an abstracted way, it's sometimes, I don't know, it's like so many stories are sort of decentered from that, like full lives. And like when we talk about, for example, like these people not being able to move from town to town, it's like you hear that that's horrible, but when you actually start to read the stories and the actual like emotional capacity there, it becomes something that's very visceral and important. So I highly suggest reading his work, Morad Barghouti is his name. He's an amazing poet, and I think it's something that's really important to dive into if you have the ability.
Awesome. All right, guys, let's do the pitch. Let me just say real quick up top, tmbs.fm. We're still doing our pre-orders. You can grab your No Coup, your Sankara, and TMBS Worldwide shirts and long sleeves. The orders are coming in. They're American-made and Teamster-made to the full extent possible. Go grab your shirts. They help. And guys, why should people become a patron?
Well, the work that we do, we're really able to touch on a lot of different subjects and have incredible guests. And being a patron really allows us to do that. That gives us the ability to have a lot more creative control so that we're not sort of stuck trying to beat certain algorithms, because our bosses end up being y'all, the patrons and the listeners. And then we're able to create content that y'all want to be able to dive in to all the subjects and, educational materials that we do. On one hand, we do these shows for the public, and then we do our post games, which is a whole second show at the end of these, which oftentimes goes on just as long, if not longer. So you're getting double the content on the day, on the Tuesday, but then we're also doing our Sunday shows. We're doing these illicit history documentaries, which we're able to dive into really interesting subjects. The most recent one was with Harvey K, I believe. And that was, a really important documentary, and we're able to produce that because of the support that we get from the patrons. Occasionally, every 2 weeks now, we moved it to every 2 weeks. I'm doing theory readings where we're jumping into different subjects. So, we'll take important questions on the left, like, state theory, and we'll say, okay, let's read Poulantzas, Ralph Miliband, and Althusser, these theorists who sort of, are laying out an entire, mode of thinking about the state, right? And we're able to work through that together over time. So I also think that that's something that's very beneficial that you're not getting other places, this kind of very curated reading list of all these different ideas and concepts on the left as well.
Once a month, starting soon, in addition for patrons, and this is going to happen once a month, but it will be really fun. Daniel Bessner, Wosny Lambre, Nando Vila, and others, we're going to do a Sopranos recap. And that's just going to be fun. So in addition to all of the other great extra content you get, and again, just a platform for thinking seriously and independently on a variety of topics and issues. We're going to be bringing in more themes, more topics, and again, not tethered to sort of any small side of an argument, hopefully going bigger and trying to create some real, actual humanitarian politics here. And we do it on a base of you, and we work really hard, and we're honored. So go to patreon.com/TMBS, get the whole thing. And if you're watching, make sure you go into our archives. There's a lot of great content there, including all of our illicit histories.
As the man just joined the meeting room himself, the 121 episode of for patrons, Money, Islamophobia, and Fascism in India, featuring Vijay Prashad.
Exactly. There we go. And joining us now, he's here?
Yep, he's coming in right now.
Okay, fantastic. Joining us now is Vijay Prashad of the Tricontinental Institute.
I'm going now, and
Vijay, are you there?
He'll be there.
Okay, he muted himself. Okay, maybe, yeah. And he knows that we're live and...
Yep, I think so. So if you intro him, there he is.
Okay, joining us now is Vijay Prashad of the Tricontinental Institute. Vijay, thanks so much for being here. How are you?
I'm super. So nice to see you. How's the pandemic doing for you?
Well, it's cooled down in New York a little bit, but it's still, unfortunately, I suspect it will come back. How are you doing with it?
No, first, I'm not sure about this, Michael, because I don't know you that well, but did you have a beard before the pandemic, or is this a pandemic beard?
This length is a pandemic beard.
I mean, it suits you. It's not a bad look.
All right. This is the second week in a row. Bill Fletcher Jr. liked the beard a lot as well.
Right. And so I, of course, shave every day because I think that my beard comes in gray. And I'm not necessarily a vain person, Michael, but I would not like to have a big gray beard to be the first thing you see when you see me.
I guess it would be overwhelming, but I could imagine that would have a lot of gravitas to it.
I'm not looking for gravitas. Yeah. I'm looking for revolution. It's a big beautiful difference. I'm a revolutionary. I'm not a wise person.
Absolutely. And I think this beard fits. I think I'm actually, Vijay, a lot of Castro comparisons. I got to tell you.
Well, when the revolutionaries came from the Sierra Maestra into the cities, they were known as the bearded ones, because all of them, none of them could shave, and they all came down with beards, and that's the term that was used, barbudos, the bearded ones. So there you are, the bearded
So here
one.
we are, and you'll be the clean shaven one.
I am Che Guevara when he shaved his beard and went off to the Congo looking like a businessman. If you look at those photographs, I model myself after the Che of the businessman look.
I love it. I love it. We have a lot of time to think about a lot of things in quarantine. Is it okay there, though? I mean, are things going okay? It definitely. I mean, a couple of months ago, people in my sort of not immediate circles, but one step removed, were dying. I mean, it was very, really horrible. There was a lot of action, and now in a way, it's kind of weirdly back to a bizarre kind of normal in New York.
Well, you're right. In the initial period of the pandemic, I lost 5 friends. One of them in Tehran, one in Paris, 2 in New York, actually. And it looked like I thought, I'd lose friends on a regular basis. Yeah. And then that has stopped. And I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, that's curious because, I have a lot of friends and comrades in Brazil, and I worry about them daily. I talk to my team in Brazil regularly. I worry about my team in Argentina, where the pandemic has again escalated. It just somehow seemed that there was this initial burst of people that I knew that got the disease and died, and now it seems that other people that I don't know are getting it. But this is a very dangerous situation, Michael, because, well, we know it's a contagious disease. We also know it apparently is not so lethal, and that distinction is important. MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, was far more lethal. I do remember returning from Beirut, coming to see a doctor in the United States, and they said, "Where have you traveled?" And I said, "Well, I was in Cairo, in Beirut," and they immediately put me in isolation, came in hazmat suits, tested me because, with MERS, the death rate was 36%. So 1 in 3 people who contracted MERS died. That's unbelievable.
That's a terrifying number. I want to talk in a few minutes about Kerala and maybe Vietnam and COVID. But first, we're several weeks now into these uprisings that have taken place across the United States after the murder of George Floyd and coming on the tail of the murder of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And there's been a lot that is shaken out. It was always going to be an uphill struggle to connect the urgent crisis of defunding and racism and policing and connect it to the broader distributional questions that underline and are connected to it, or it would get pivoted into sort of another round of kind of cultural skirmishes and so on. And I think, unfortunately we've been trending in that direction, but what do you make of the uprisings, the intrinsic importance of them and how they're playing out?
I mean, Michael, honestly, the United States has a serious problem. It has a kind of rot in its soul. This is a country that from its inception was not able to handle the crime of having human beings as property. I mean, there's not many countries in the world that from their inception were given the opportunity to walk away from having human beings as property. None of the founding fathers stood up and said that we think that human beings should not be property. I mean, there's a rot in the soul of the American original story. And then right through, there's never really been an accounting of this. And therefore, punctually, every time there's a particularly grotesque incident of violence by the police, there is a cycle of uprisings. This is a punctual thing. It's not between the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson and George Floyd, I'm told that there have been, thousands of people killed by the police department. Not all African American, not all Latinos, but thousands of people killed by the police department. That, hurts me as a human being. That's something that should actually hurt people, that a police department would kill so many people. You have a civilization, and I'm sorry, I'm using the word civilization a lot, but you have a civilization that believes that it's better to use social resources to put a police officer between food and a hungry person than to just use those resources to feed the hungry person. I mean, Eric Garner was killed because he was allegedly selling loose cigarettes. George Floyd was killed because he was allegedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill. These are two people hungry, wanting to feed their family. Why not, as a civilization, find a way to feed the family rather than hire people to stand between food and the hungry? This is a choice that a civilization has made. And the United States needs to look this choice in the eye and say that either we accept this choice or we reject this choice. And it seems to me that when young people, when sensitive people say defund the police, what they're actually saying, Michael, is they're saying, I would prefer to get George Floyd food than hire a police officer to prevent him from eating. I'd prefer for Eric Garner and his children, Erica and others, I'd prefer them to get resources to have a dignified life than to hire police officers to suffocate him on the street. That's what they're saying. They're not saying, let's get rid of the police. They're not naive, but they're making an argument that the civilizational choice made by the United States is unacceptable. And I tend to agree with them. It's an unacceptable thing. Hungry people should never be prevented from food by a police officer. I think that is a vulgarity, and a vulgarity particularly when it's so much on racial grounds. So in that sense, the United States is a decaying civilization, and the young, sensitive people on the streets, they recognize that, and I applaud them for that.
And that's right. And so we talked with Cedric Johnson about this a couple of weeks ago, moving beyond the technical fix and connecting police violence to all of these other distributional and power questions. And then, we see the way it kind of launches out. And so all of us, and you'll see activists using social media, and they'll quote tweet some new, silly story like the Golden Girls are going to get taken off air or some nonsense. And they'll say, okay, can we get back to defund the police, please? And so, going several weeks in, as the powers that be start to engage with it, Cedric Johnson called it blackwashing in a piece in the Jacobin. The further we get to, again, a new kind of culture war politics, primarily of kind of elite institutions in the upper middle class, away from the class dimension and the basic humanity dimension of you should not be a target of law enforcement and violence because of the color of your skin. And people have risked their lives. We saw the incredible brutality and viciousness of the police response. But now, a couple of weeks out, here we are back in another sort of, superficial culture war cycle.
Yeah, but I don't see that, Michael. I don't actually agree with that. I feel like I'd like to say two things. One is I understand that there was frustration over the deep violence. And, by the way, rioting does happen. Rioting is not something that happens because it's, driven by somebody. No, it's a direct reaction to a decayed system. Right. People are frustrated, they're angry, they just come out. That happens. But then there were these protests organized by often young Black women in many cities. They were the principal organizers, not from any political organization, but they were helped by other organizations and so on. And those took place. That moved into, I think, a very correct questioning of the things that are celebrated in society. Statues, for instance, Confederate statues, throw them away, Columbus and so on. You see, my issue is not that then it goes into the culture war. I would like a conversation to happen, which is not disappointment with the nature of the movement, but to try to deepen and further and advance the movement. So where the movement needs to go now is it needs to come back to the old question. And I understand that this old question, eyeballs will roll, People will sigh, but it's the old question of reparations. I mean, look, reparations it's a very maybe antagonistic word. It's a fighting kind of word, but this is what it means. It means 40 acres and a mule. You promised after the abolition of enslavement, you promised reconstruction. You gave a slogan, 40 acres and a mule. If I calculate the price of 40 acres and a mule from 1865 to 2020, it amounts to reparations. What do you need? You need to have a serious discussion about the fact that there is enormous amount of wealth in the United States and in tax havens that should be brought into productive use inside the United States. You cannot have a country, the United States, such a rich country, where somebody is not able to feed themselves and their family. In fact, I believe that nobody on the planet Earth should be hungry. I think hunger is the great abomination of 2020. But if we're talking specifically about the United States, Michael, it is an abomination. People should be able to go and eat food somewhere. That should just be a fact. There should be no need to commodify food. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's advance the conversation. I'm more interested in that than in saying, oh, the whole debate, the whole struggle has been diverted by the elites and so on. I don't care about the elites. I don't care about Joe Biden. I don't care about the Democratic Party. They interest me nothing, because they are going to be disappointing always. That's not the way to think. I don't care about their blackwashing. I'm more interested in how do we advance the movement? How do young people who have entered into a movement, often for the first time in their lives, have been politicized? How do we show them? How do we, give them our sense of history and say, what's important? Get the statue down. I agree with you. I don't have any problem. Get Columbus down. I have no problem with that. But now let's demand that everybody get fed. Columbus one side, food the other. Yeah.
And that statues, of course, those statues should come down, but those could be the icing on the cake, not the sole function. Actually, let's go to Kerala. I'm going to go on a slight diversion. I'm tempted to ask you, are you actually surprised that you don't see more things like rioting in the United States?
Yes, I am surprised.
Okay.
I mean, look, so. The fact is that, you were going to ask me about Kerala or Vietnam or things, and I would like to actually bring that into how I would answer you. When you create a society where public action is delegitimized, in the United States, there's been almost 100-year attack on trade unions, on people's organizations. I mean, you go back to the raids in 1919, the Palmer raids, then McCarthyism. There's been a long history of attacking trade unions, tethering unions, breaking up people's organizations, independent organizations of people. You atomize people, you let them be on their own, then they join relatively illegal and very disturbing type of organizations. That's what happens in places like the United States, where you fragment society. In a place like Kerala, almost everybody is a member of either a trade union, a women's organization, youth organization, student organization, cooperatives, and so on. It's a highly organized society. People don't see themselves as individuals. And by the way, some of the organizations are ascriptive. In other words, they are church groups or they are religious groups or whatever. But people are organized so that when a crisis hits a place like Kerala, public action kicks in immediately. The trade unions come out there, they start feeding people, they build sinks in public, they do all kinds of things. In the United States, when you have a crisis, the magnitude of this pandemic, you don't see the trade unions doing anything. I mean, trade unions have sort of taught themselves to be bargaining units. Where have the trade unions been to bring medicines to the elderly? Where have the trade unions been to feed the homeless, feed the poor? You just don't see them anywhere, Michael. In Cuba, 28,000 medical students walked out of their dormitories and tested 11 million Cuban citizens. That's the totality of the population of Cuba. 28,000 medical students. I haven't seen a medical student from any American university, public or private, go out and test the public. In fact, you're in New York. I doubt that any state official or quasi-state official has rung your doorbell and said, can I stick this thing up your nose to test you? Nobody, because the state has collapsed in the United States and society is not available. And this is the reason why I believe that in a country like the United States, when anything happens, the tendency to mass rioting is much greater because there's no mediation between the people and their frustrations and the elites. There's no organizations, unions, and so on. People just go out there and they're angry. In other societies, there are mediations. That's the price you pay if you destroy society.
How did Kerala create that trajectory for itself? And in a global age, how can America, even the left in the United States, I know I'm being very critical today, but I wish that the left in the United States, and one of the goals of this show is to have a much more genuinely global perspective. So that even sometimes when we generate movements, there's this idea that we're exporting them versus the sort of the history that, to me, in many ways, you exemplify. One of the reasons I admire your work so much, that this really is a global collaborative endeavor, and it works east, west, north, south. There is a shared working condition that's universal, and there are overlapping trajectories and aspirations, and we can learn from each other. So, and I think, Kerala to me is a very striking example of that, a Marxist state or someone Marxist state in India that has this extraordinary performance above its own nation state and very relevant to not only the kind of immediate crisis of COVID, but the underlying conditions you're talking about.
I mean, look, it took 100 years for Kerala to build this. It's not just that there's a communist government in power there. This is part of the history of the state, building public action into the culture of Kerala, into the society of Kerala, the importance of public action and so on. I mean, look, the United States had the importance of public action. It was such an important part of US history until the early 20th century. In a sense, until the Bolshevik Revolution in the USSR, there were very important public institutions of people in the United States, including trade unions, whether it's the old AFL or it's the IWW, the International Workers of the World. And let's not just stay with unions. Let's talk about neighborhood organizations, and then let's talk about church groups and so on. About 20 years ago, an American political scientist by the name of Robert Putnam wrote a book which had a rather silly title, and it seemed anachronistic. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And the point of the book was that Americans don't belong to things like bowling leagues and, various things where they are organized into groups. Now, Robert, the example of bowling in the 21st century is anachronistic. I mean, there's so
bowling,
many.
Vijay?
Look, I don't mind bowling, but to pick bowling leagues and the decline of bowling leagues somehow seemed a little silly. There are other ways of gauging the lack of organized activity. Now, look, let's not exaggerate this, because of course people are organized. Friends have groups. They meet, they party together, they have a good time. There are lots of ways in which people continue to reproduce society. It's not like you're sitting by yourself alone, untethered from other people. No, there are friendship groups. They go play sports together. They play pickup games. There are knitting circles. There are lots of ways in which people are organized. But the issue is, does this social organization translate into public action? And I think that's the real gap. And that gap has come because of the actual quite deliberate attack during the McCarthy period to prevent social groups from public action. So, you have now very sensitive and decent people doing mutual aid in this time of COVID, going out, trying to help their neighbors and so on. But it's not at a big scale. It's small groups. The big organizations, the trade unions and so on, they have had their feet cut from under them. They have been reduced to bargaining units. And one of the things that I think one needs to teach them is what unions used to do in the United States. They used to be a site of working class culture. In a community, the union hall was the place where you rented and you had your marriage there. It was the place where you went on the weekend and heard music. It was the place you played bingo and whatever. Those are anachronistic things. I get it. There are modern ways to use.
You're going to go after bowling and then do that list?
I know, but that was in the past. The issue is where is the union hall today?
Right.
Where is it? I mean, it doesn't exist. The working class culture is not being held together by these organizations. In other countries, they are. And so that's what we need to actually think about, is the translation of our social networks into public action. And you have to have the experience of public action. You can't wait for an emergency. When an emergency happens, we're paralyzed. We don't know what to do. And I think that's what's happened in many of the advanced industrial countries, where there is a kind of paralysis, and the state is also useless, so nothing's happening.
So and there's a cycle to it. The state is useless, people are atomized, and then they're reinforcing each other in terms of lack of coordination and action and everything. And then when you do that, I mean, I had a discussion recently where it was like the only things that really work in the United States just functionally are the Fed and the military. I mean, these are the kind of prime institutions of government that have, the Fed knows how to pump trillions into the financial system, and we still have we have an empire. I don't know how functioning it is, but it certainly is everywhere functioning.
I just published a book this week called Washington Bullets, which is about the CIA and assassinations and so on. And to write this book, I interviewed tons of ex-CIA people. And I would also like to add that, not because I'm a fan of the CIA, but I know that they actually do function and they work. And it's all terrible stuff that they do. Nothing that the CIA does is good, but they actually are very functional, and so is the NSA. Very functional. In fact, they're taping this conversation we're having. Sure. They'll analyze it later. They'll decide, since you're talking to me, whether they should downgrade your status as a human being and so on. But, these are functional institutions. But what's not functional in the state, and I mean, I'm saying this not with any pleasure, are the good side of history. Where is the state when it comes to people, suffering from mental illness? So many stories come, Michael, of somebody with schizophrenia in a public place, having an episode, and the cop comes and shoots them to death.
Yes.
So, I mean, I can list one after the other these stories. What kind of civilization is that, where you tolerate the execution of a person with mental illness because the police officer is not trained to deal with them? I'm not even blaming the cop there. I think they just don't have any training. They shouldn't be dealing with that. You need more social workers. You need more public health people. Every street in the United States needs a public health clinic. Why should a person wait to see their primary care doctor, or if they have insurance? If they don't have insurance, go to an emergency room. Why can't they go to a clinic, public health clinic funded by our taxes, where you go in and say, I have a boil. Can you just have a look at it? Oh, the person looks at it and says, that might be skin cancer. Instead of waiting for me to develop advanced skin cancer and then, the costs of that, here they look at it and say, we can launch that and the cancer is gone. Wow, let's do that. Let's have a public health clinic. You don't have those things. So the state has become, in a sense, money, as you said, the Fed. The state has become money and violence. It's become money in the sense of the Fed and taxation, actually, and violence, the police and the military. You don't see the state as compassionate. And that's another reason why this anti-state attitude develops. I don't think the state is inherently discompassionate. State can be a compassionate state. I would like that. Nothing wrong with a nanny state. They used to make a joke, nanny state. Well, Americans don't get nanny because that's an elite British thing. Elite British people like Boris Johnson had nannies. But nothing wrong with a nanny. This Mary Poppins, you take the medicine with a spoonful of sugar. I'd do that. I'd wear a mask, nanny, if it came with sugar, which means I can live longer.
Right. And maybe if they provided the mask too. At the end of my interview with President Lula, he said the job of the presidency, and it's very interesting, the sort of dynamics here, because there's no wokeness with Lula, but there's also none of this other like residual, like patriarchal kind of stuff and nonsense. And he's sitting there and he's like, union guy, no bullshitter, clear communicator. And at the end, he goes, being a president is like being the mother of a country. And when you're a mother, you have to look out for the weakest kids. And I mean, it was perfectly sensible. It was beautiful. He connected it with the anti-poverty program. And I thought the clarity of that expression is completely missing here. And exactly, I think, what you're talking about. And the question is, I mean, on this point, I think we're in such a state of, certainly people watching this know that, and they have a strong sense of it. And I think they feel either the physical threat of the situation we're in, or at the very least, even if they're more materially comfortable, I think we have to get increasingly real about the psychic distress that you're describing, because it really is just such a disgusting situation. Where are the pressure points? What can be done? I mean, what are you thinking on? It could be anything, man. It's got to be a little generative, yeah?
The first thing I would say is I'm very glad you brought up Lula, because, in the past 20 years, there haven't been many heads of government that have put hunger front and center in their policy. There haven't been many. I mean, it costs a lot politically to say that the hungry person is the primary focus of my government. It costs a lot politically. The rich are not interested in the hungry. Let's be frank, okay? So Lula is an extraordinary person. Whatever limitations and, you hear a lot of criticism on the left of Lula, which I think is really uncharitable and bogus, and I don't pay attention to it. He's a terrific person. Yeah. And then there are people on the right who say Lula this, Lula that. In fact, what they're afraid of is this is a human being, a genuine human being who ran a government in a sensitive way, putting the hungry people at the forefront. And I really think it's not only admirable, it's very unusual in this period. Let's compare them to Donald Trump, compare Lula to Donald Trump and to Joe Biden. It's no comparison. Here's a human being, and these people are basically not human beings, in my opinion. I don't mean not human beings in an sympathetic. I mean, their humanity to me is in question. Donald Trump, it's striking how much disregard he seems to have for the basic problems of human beings, and I haven't seen Mr. Biden demonstrate a great compassion, apart from some rhetorical flourishes to win over the left. So the United States is in a particular kind of crisis, long-term political crisis. One of the things that I've really enjoyed in this pandemic is I've enjoyed interacting, because of these Zoom meetings and so on, with the Democratic Socialists of America, with the the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, with the old left groups and so on. I've really enjoyed interacting with the young people in these movements. Why is that? Because I think they come to politics, Michael, out of a great sense of compassion. They don't come to politics because they think, they're ideological or this or that or whatever. They're not angry. They are compassionate people. I mean, there's a whole generation now that are on the streets saying defund the police from an extraordinarily compassionate place. Now, I'm a Marxist and I'm using the word compassion over and over again, and that might sound odd. But I don't believe that you can have a politics, a genuinely liberatory politics, unless you feel for other people. If you don't feel for people, you can't enter left politics out of a theory. Theories are not enough. You have to actually feel for people suffering, for their struggles, and you have to enter their struggles in order to change the world. And I genuinely feel, and I genuinely believe that this generation that's coming up, not only in the United States, but around the world, they are struck by the immensity of the contradictions, the climate contradictions, the pandemic, the disaster of neoliberalism, the impossibility of capitalism, the very fact that you have a system now that says we prefer to burn food than feed the hungry. All this stuff, it distresses an entire generation. Now, others will say it's traumatizing them. I don't think so. I think it's clarifying for them that the path is either, barbarism entirely or something utterly different. And I think they are choosing utterly different. And I'm very proud of these people. I think that they will essentially walk the road to save the world from barbarism. People like Boris Johnson, Bolsonaro, Trump, even Biden, all these people, they just want to take us some of them want to accelerate the car to barbarism. Others want to ride the brake to barbarism. They don't have a clue that there's a way to move to a compassionate society. I don't think they have a clue. I just don't think they understand that that's possible. But I think these young people, they have seen, look, the world is going to be destroyed by climate change. The world is destroyed by hunger. The world is destroyed by this system that eats people alive. We don't want this shit. We want something better. And I feel that emotional, that coming from the soul politics is much more hopeful for me than any theory that you'd read in a book. Now, I am a person who reads a lot, who writes a lot, who believes in theory. But I want to say that if you don't feel for humanity, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You have to feel. And the example you gave of Lula, here is a person, Lula, who feels that the pain of a person is just not tolerable. And I think that's the lesson for today. You got to just say it's just intolerable that people are suffering.
No, I love that. And I'm not going to let you go, even though that was a perfect summation, because we put hybrid war in the title. So I need to ask you about hybrid war. It also fascinates me. Can you, when we go back to the global dimension of this, and I guess there's a variety of factors that we could bring in the mix. Obviously, there's the consequences of COVID on the periphery, the developing world, whatever. I'm inspired by you sometimes to reclaim the term third world, and the consequences distributionally and the effects of COVID in a place like Brazil, obviously. And then there's the attempt, whether it's Venezuela to fend for itself from U.S. interference, Iran too, for that matter. I mean, I have much more sympathy ideologically for where Venezuela is coming from, but the geopolitics bear a lot of parallels. And I'm wondering if you could, is there any room left in today's world for some type of non-aligned world? Is there any type of alternative to the U.S. emerging? And what is this U.S. tactic of hybrid war? It's another term that gets thrown around all over the place now, but you actually have a precise explanation of it. And I do want to say, no need to connect it, but I think this is the type of thing that people need to become increasingly aware of. If, as an example, people do continue protesting in the long term or thinking of politics in broader ways, you have to have a sense of these strategies because they will be deployed domestically if they aren't already.
Yeah, so, Michael, this is a very long story, yes, but just to put it quickly, war escalates technologically. There was a time when cavalries met or people met with pikes and so on. And the moment you could fly a plane above the front line, that changed the terms of war because you could bomb industrial bases, you could bomb civilians and so on. And you change the character of war. There's always been a part of war which has been information warfare. You'd fly above the front line and you drop leaflets saying, you're going to lose because we're sending. There's always been information war. There's always been economic war. There's always been a multifaceted way in which people have fought. It's never just the pikes. We have God on our side. You are an infidel. That's an information war. But as technology increases and you enter, let's say, a digital landscape where things are, for instance, an electricity grid is managed by a computer which can get hacked. The moment you enter this digital landscape, the sort of degrees of information war, economic war, etc., escalate into a different kind of war. It's a different kind of war entirely. So what is a hybrid war? Hybrid war is not a war which is fought necessarily on a battlefield anymore. You can now take away the battlefield. Instead of having to fly the plane over the front line, there's no front line anymore. What you have is you have an information war where you can utilize the mechanisms of media, social media, satellite media to delegitimize a government. You can suddenly say that Nicolas Maduro is not the president of Venezuela, he is a dictator. So that's information war. Then you can do diplomatic warfare. You can say, now we're going to put pressure on the Organization of American States, which basically is anyway a US puppet, and we'll say, we're going to eject the Maduro government and we'll welcome the Guaido government as the legitimate government. Wow, how did you do that? You've now delegitimized the government diplomatically. Then we're going to say, we're going to cut you off from finances. Even your money in our banks, we won't let you access. We won't let you buy and sell things. You know, those 5 Iranian oil tankers that came and delivered oil to Venezuela, they didn't come for free. You know, the Venezuelans paid them. It's a normal capitalist transaction, which the United States was blocking. There's nothing out of this world. They were just selling and buying oil. You know, it's capitalism which was being blocked. If you are a libertarian, you should be outraged by that. So that's an economic war. Then there's sabotage. You can hack into their systems and destroy electricity grids and various things. You know, you can go in and break things. We know these things happen. So it's a range of different kinds of attacks on a country. The so-called sanctions is only one piece of it. And the more of these new techniques you use to suffocate a country, the pressure inside the country rises, because the ordinary people will suffer, and the idea is they will then overthrow the government. That's the idea. You'll remember that when the United States pursued a very harsh sanctions policy on Iraq, there was a UN report that said 500,000 children had died. On a particular morning after the report came out, Madeleine Albright, then US ambassador to the United Nations, was on Good Morning America or 60 Minutes or one of these shows. And she was asked, there is this UN report that says, because of US sanctions, 500,000 Iraqi children have died. Now, Madam Albright could have said many things. One is, the report is lying. She didn't say that. She could have said, yes, people are dying, but it's because of Saddam Hussein, not because of US sanctions. She didn't say that. You know, she could have said, I haven't looked at the report yet. We have to study it. She could have said that. She didn't. She said neither of these three things. Instead, she said, it's a price worth paying. She accepted that the United States government had a policy that killed 500,000 Iraqi children. She didn't deny it. She said, it's a price worth paying. Later, she said, I regret the way I said it, but she didn't regret what she said. She said, 500,000, that's worth it. So in all these hybrid wars, a range of techniques are utilized to suffocate a country in order to change the government. Now, if we have time, I'd like to just go back to say there should be a standard for this. In the United Nations Charter, which was written in 1945, there is an important part called Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. You see, they were coming after the Holocaust, one of the most grotesque events that took place in Europe. I mean, there were Holocausts in the colonies, but this was grotesque. It took place in Europe's industrial scale murder, genocide of people. So what the people who framed the charter said, what happens if a government on its sovereign territory is doing something horrendous to its own people? Well, this is not actually the case with the Holocaust, because in fact, the Nazis had gone into Poland, where they were doing a lot of activities in occupied Poland. Many of the concentration camps, the death camps, were in Poland, not in German territory. But anyway, the point is, in your sovereign territory, if you're doing something horrible to your people, what can the international community do? Under Chapter 6, there are a series of things you can do. You can publicly denounce it, diplomatic pressure. You can have economic sanctions, economic pressure, and so on. That's under Chapter 6. Under Chapter 7, you can use armed force to stop it. But you see, the UN Charter allows you to do these actions under 6 and 7 if you can demonstrate that there's a standard met of genocidal behavior by the government. See, so that's the UN Charter. You have to, the standard before you get to hybrid war is genocidal behavior. The United States government has no standard. It's people we don't like. Like, have they had to prove that the Venezuelan government of Hugo Chavez was conducting genocide against the people? There is no proof of that, and they never even tried it. They just didn't like him. Why? Because he was using oil wealth to help his people. Why did they not like Evo Morales? Not because he's conducting genocide against his people. The opposite. Evo Morales was lifting the standard of living of his people. I mean, in each of these cases, the United States uses the kind of chapter 6, chapter 7 techniques in the UN Charter without meeting the standard of the Charter. So they totally violate the spirit of international law in a gangster mafia-ish way, go after people they just don't like. I mean, you don't like Chavez, you want to overthrow him. Well, if you want to overthrow Chavez, why don't you overthrow the kings of Saudi Arabia? I mean, it's a fair question.
It's a very fair question. So is this the best framework for understanding in 2020 how the United States engineers this type of war, this attempt to remove somebody, that we could get to a situation where a bank in England could say, you, Venezuelan government, cannot access your own gold because some guy in the parliament has claimed he's president, and that doesn't strike everybody as insane.
Let me give you an example of this. Right when the COVID-19 pandemic was coming into the Americas, the first case was actually in Brazil in February. Around that time, to her credit, the head of the IMF announced that there's a new facility. Any country is allowed to apply for funds, any country, and you'll get it. I mean, it's not a problem. So President Maduro of Venezuela, taking the IMF at its word, applied for emergency funding so that they could buy equipment to tackle the COVID-19 problem. Within 2 days, the IMF responded saying, sorry, we can't fund you because there's a problem. Okay. So I called the IMF and I talked to the spokesperson, very nice person, and I'd spoken to him before, and I said, what's the issue here? And he said, well, I'm sending you the statement. So he sent the statement. The statement said that, well, there is a problem because the actual government of Venezuela is contested. It's not clear that it's Mr. Maduro, so he has applied. We don't accept him because there's Guaido, but because we don't have confirmation that it's Guaido and there's uncertainty, we can't give the money. Okay, so I called the IMF back and said, but on your own website, you recognize the finance minister, Mr. Zerpa, of the Maduro government as the finance minister of Venezuela. So on your website, you recognize him as the finance minister. He has signed a paper, he signed your staff reports and so on. So what's the confusion? Within 24 hours, he disappeared from the website. Interesting. The United Kingdom has recently had a single judge in the UK High Court declare, after the Venezuelan government approached the High Court, that the Bank of England cannot turn over $1.3 billion of gold, which the Venezuelans want to sell to the United Nations Development Program to raise funds for COVID-19. The Venezuelan government doesn't want the gold to be shipped to the Swiss bank. They want to sell it to the UNDP. Let's be clear about that. That's what they have said they're going to do. Judge says, sorry, you're not the legitimate government. It's Mr. Guaido. Now, interestingly, in London, the accredited ambassador of Venezuela to the UK government is the ambassador sent by President Maduro. That means government of the United Kingdom, despite what they keep saying verbally, Boris Johnson, totally believable person, it seems, by some people, not by me, they still recognize the ambassador that's sent by the Maduro government. So what is going on here? I mean, what we have is we have a very dangerous game afoot where the United States and its allies like Great Britain are essentially running a lawless mafia campaign in the world. Whoever they don't like, they say, we don't like you, but it's contradictory. How can you say you are not the government and yet you accept the ambassador? You see, they'll continue to have problems with this. Like in Israel, for instance, the Israeli government says we are going to annex the West Bank. The hard right is very angry because the annexation of the West Bank means that you'll have to recognize the existence of Palestine. So they don't want to annex the West Bank. So you see, these are the contradictions that they keep tying themselves into. We are in favor of international law. We are not in favor of mafia annexations of Palestinians or mafia annexation of 1.3 billion Venezuelan money. We are in favor of international law. They are in favor of some sort of mafia order. I'm afraid they scare me.
Vijay Prashad, will you join us again soon and talk about Ho Chi Minh?
I love coming on your show because it's basically like sitting in your lovely living room, and I'm enjoying seeing it behind you. Anytime you ask me, I'll be back.
Thank you so much, Vijay. And you could see, actually, you got the book, a picture of me with Lula, and Kali. So yeah, it's nice.
Viva Lula.
Viva Lula. Vijay Prashad,
Okay.
thank you so much. Stay safe. Be well. It's always so good talking to you.
Bye. Likewise. Bye.
Take care. Guys, read Vijay Prashad. I just like so many articles and so many books, including like I think it's Red Star Over the Third World. It's like the Soviet relationship with revolutionaries in Mexico, Japan, the Congo. I mean, he's just a wonderful guy and a really, really, really brilliant thinker, as you could see. So,
and a really serious non-ideal, like he's a very serious Marxist too. I always appreciate that in his work, that he gets down to the nitty gritty and doesn't really get fixated so much on like particular labels and all of
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, he's just a wonderful guy and brilliant. All right. So I think what we're going to do now, David, is we're going to do the gem.
Sounds good.
And then we're going to have on Stavros. How do I pronounce? I don't want
Halkias.
Halkias. Jesus Christ. Should talk about that for 15 minutes. All right. I'll be right back. You get started, brother.
All right. Yeah. Well, there's been essentially an important story that's been going on since the beginning of the crisis, but it's starting to hit ahead as some basic protections are expiring, but also because of some illicit activities of landlords. But we're facing and are going to see a much worse eviction crisis going on in the United States. The CARES Act was supposed to protect people from evictions, from evictions if their landlord benefited from federal subsidies. And all across the country, but I know specifically in Texas, it seems like a lot of landlords are just filing evictions against people regardless. So there was a piece in Texas Observer by Megan Kimball, which found that one, there was no real enforcement behind that provision in CARES. And now landlords are going forward pursuing evictions against people who have not been able to pay their rent since the crisis has started. So in Harris County, 10% of the evictions actually in Harris County were found to be in violation of the CARES Act. But still, they're just going forward, and people are going into court. They don't know their rights because there's been such a backlog of cases. Judges are essentially just rubber stamping things at the moment. And this isn't isolated to Texas. This is a fundamental problem across the country. People are relying on unemployment benefits. They're scraping by, but a lot of people are having to take care of family members who are unable to work. And now we're months away from the initial stimulus check, and many Americans are without money. And as the virus is especially flying through the state of Texas, people are seeing their sources of income dry up. And some cities have come forward with plans. Like Austin, for example, it has a plan. It's like your landlord has to alert you 60 days before, I believe, they can evict you. So it sort of gives you a little bit of grace period in between that time. But even still, then you're responsible to pay back all of this rent in the first place. So then you're in a situation where you owe $4,000 for the past few months. So there's a real crisis when it comes to housing and specifically evictions, as landlords are now gearing up to start coming after people who have been unable to pay rent since the beginning of this crisis. They're using the court system. They're using the kind of fear and weakness of lower income people who don't really have access to strong lawyers to be able to defend them in these situations. And this is a nationwide problem. The Washington Post, citing the COVID eviction defense project, found that 20% of the 110 million of Americans who rent units are at risk of eviction by September 30th. And that's for a myriad of different reasons. But fundamentally, the fact that most people are unable to earn viable income during this time. So, this is not only just like a moral crisis, this is a fundamental capitalist crisis. So people are going to say the term housing crisis, and I'm not trying to be nitpicky here, but let's really talk about what that means. Did houses and apartments all over the country just become filled? Or did we see the housing stock just evaporate or disappear? No. What we are seeing is landlords who prey upon the labor of the vast majority of people in this country are finding it difficult to extract money from those people. So they're using the arms of the state, oftentimes illegally and illicitly, to try to corral and force those people into paying absurd amounts of money, including late fees, which is a whole other conversation. Which is a whole other conversation. So that's going on. And what's this? And the state basically is supporting them. So we don't have a housing crisis in this country. We have a capitalism crisis. We have a crisis that is going on and has been agitated because of coronavirus, but it's fundamentally a problem of the defense of private property, the defense of private property over the kind of very basic decisions of humanity that we should be making right now, which is we have houses, we have people who need to be housed, we need people not to be out in public right now, not working right now because we need to prevent this virus from happening. We need a national rent freeze. We need forgiveness on all of these evictions. We need forgiveness on back rent since the beginning of this crisis. There has been a complete failure on a state level. And now we're on a question as on a people level. Are we going to be able to stand up as a group of people, as I just said, 110 million of us, who are threatened by landlords against the system that's going to try to throw people out on the street through to no fault of their own, because we are all going through this crisis together right now. And, we need to be prepared and fighting back because it's something that touches so many people. And it's so basic of a problem that we have the housing, we have the ability to house folks. And, our system is actually the problem. It's the reason that there's a tension here.
I have nothing to add to that. And I'll just say, I don't like to lean into this shit too much, but I know like what losing your house is like, and not knowing where a house is going to be. And the idea that we allow this to happen to anybody could not be more grotesque and disgusting. And the scale that we're about to hit, unless there's a serious intervention, people doing rent strikes, policy intervention, whatever, is totally fucked.
Yeah. And the source of the problem is property, though, too. So
it's just crazy how property feels confident to throw people out during a fucking pandemic.
We're just so used to it, too.
Right.
That's the problem. Is we're so used to this idea that that's an okay thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, the default setting is fucked. Do we have our guest?
He'll be joining us shortly.
Okay. I'm going to try to see if I can pronounce this right. Joining us now, Matt, what's the name of the Twitch show?
Stavi Solves Your Problems.
Okay, joining us now is Stavros Halkias. He is a co-host on Cumtown, and he's also does Stavi Solves Your Problems on Twitch. Stavros.
That's right.
Thank you so much for doing this, man.
How we doing? Oh, thanks for having me, dude.
Dude, I've wanted to do this for a while. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
how you doing?
Pretty good, just kind of trying to stay busy in here, trying to get some stuff done. Every day's a struggle in quarantine, but I'm trying, baby.
How seriously are you still taking quarantine?
I was like crazy with it. Like I wasn't leaving for anything. I wasn't doing, I was wiping down groceries, wiping down takeout.
Same.
But, now I wasn't even going outside for a while. Now I'm taking walks, doing that, but it gets a little lax. I've had to double back to the sink and make sure I wash my hands once or twice after a stroll, but, I'm still trying to, I went to see my family in Baltimore because I've been here, with a roommate the whole time. So I took a drive down to Baltimore and, I'm getting out there a little bit more, but what are you going to do? The world's not going back to normal. The part of my life that I liked, I'm a stand-up comic, and that's basically that industry is just done for, I don't know, a year or two. I don't know. People are trying to do outside shows. People are trying, but it's not going to be the same. The best part of a stand-up show was 100 people in a packed basement meant for 40 people, super tight. Everyone's laughing. That is exactly how if you could design how to spread COVID, it's a stand-up comedy show. So it's not happening for a while, basically.
We're talking to somebody. I forget who. Sorry. But somebody about I feel bad for them. But they were going to try to do it on Zoom, basically.
Yeah.
Is there any way that could work?
No, man. That's the thing. I don't mean, a lot of my friends are trying, and God bless them. I get it. But to me, it's like, it doesn't even exist. You know what I mean?
How would you even see? Could you even set it up so you could see everybody, or would you? Yeah, would it be like this?
Yeah, most of the shows are like this. But one of my friends did a show in LA somewhere where they had like huge wraparound screens and everyone's on Zoom and you can kind of, there's like a square everywhere. And that was the closest thing to, whatever. The analogy he used, it was like having sex. It was like being with a sex robot. It's like, it's not, it's not the real thing.
Not inspiring.
But it's the closest you can get. It's the real doll of
you
stand-up comedy.
click. You have to have like, you want to like bother somebody in the crowd. You have to like, could you put yourself on camera, please?
Yeah.
Consult your living room or something.
Doing crowd work via FaceTime.
This is the type of guy. Where'd he go?
Yeah. Sir, plug your router in, please. Could you unplug and plug it back in?
His connection's bad. I was going to criticize his relationship. That's actually kind of funny.
Yeah.
It's like the same bullshit, except over Zoom.
Totally. Can't even afford 5G. You could maybe get on them for that. But
so my mom let me watch Eddie Murphy Raw when I was like 7 or 8 years old.
Yes.
Which I still am a fan of. It's crazy like how tastes don't change. But she's also got, and I got this from her, where it doesn't make any sense because like I'll watch that. I don't like profanity, vulgarity, whatever, and then all of a sudden there'll be like specific things. Particularly, I don't like bathroom stuff. Full stop. Yeah. But then like I'll hear like the name, and it's just like Come Down. Like wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so there's that, and then I'm just curious because like if my mom's listening, I know she's going to be like, "Well, that's disgusting."
Right, and it is.
And it is. And what did your family think?
Oh, it's the best. My mom is if you want to think about the overly supportive, just caricature of a cute little chubby Eastern European mom will feed you. You come by the house to pick up, something, she's going to send you home with a plate. Just the sweetest woman on earth. Thought I was going to be one of those kids that goes to Harvard at like 11, like believes in her son so much. And she was, she's obviously proud that it was like, it kind of took off and I'm making my living off of it. And it was so funny to hear her. I overheard her once on the phone talking to like a family friend. And she's like, "Oh, Stavros doing this radio show with his friends. And there's so many listeners and people pay for it. And he doesn't have a day." And then I just hear her get cut off. And she goes, "What's it? It's called Calm Down." And it's just like, all the pride and everything just drops out of her voice.
Drains out of her.
But, what are you going to do? We broke I'm a first generation. I'm the firstborn in an immigrant family. So we broke that, go to law school thing. Once that was over, once I wasn't going to do the traditional thing, my mom, she just wanted to see that I was working hard and was happy. And so she's supportive. It just, we don't get too into the specifics, but,
Oh, she doesn't just like, and then what they did was, what if AOC and Rashida Tlaib had the same show, but it was called Pussy Town. And then they insulted each other just like the boys do. And then God. Nick made a joke about the SWAT sticker. I don't understand. But they make money. Okay, she doesn't do that.
She doesn't know how to work a podcast, thank God. We just got her on Netflix, you know what I mean? So there's a technological barrier stopping her so she can stay, supportive, cute mom. She's come to my stand-up shows, and my material is pretty vulgar, so she's supportive there. She just likes to see me having a good time.
That's cool. Did you ever try to like do the law school thing?
I was a paralegal in Baltimore very briefly. I actually was. It was like for an evil law firm. Like I didn't realize when I took the job.
What kind of evil?
It was like foreclosure law, right?
Oh.
So
that's not even like cool. Like
no, there's nothing. Okay. There's nothing good. So what I did was. Wow. Yeah, I stopped. Evil. I was like, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to once I realized what my job was after training, I stopped working. I was like, I'm just going to work on stand up. And I was like, I'll maybe get a couple weeks. It'll take them to catch on to what I'm doing. And I just got to work there for like 5 months without doing anything. I was taking like 2-hour lunches. I was just like, my boss would they had like the stats of what everyone's doing. And they were like, on a typical day, one of your coworkers might run through 40 files. We couldn't even tell how many files you did because your computer wasn't logged on enough during the day to even run the analytics. That's what they were when I was getting fired. That's what they told me.
How did that work for 5 months?
Dude, it was just one of those horrible bureaucracies where think about the kind of people that want to work for a law firm like that. They're the reverse cream of the crop. You know what I mean? Just the absolute shit of the crop. People that can't get. It was in Maryland, but you had to be Florida barred. It was like people who couldn't work anywhere else. It was just the worst place you've ever, been. So they didn't understand how to manage people. And thank
I
God,
actually remember I don't normally say this much family stuff at all, but I remember being a teenager and there was an eviction process. And on one hand being like, obviously scared of these lawyers because they're like getting us out of our home.
Of course.
Right. But I remember just even as a teenager, like, I was only like 14 or something, but I just saw the landlord's counsel walking with them around the property. And it was just like, that guy?
Yeah. Totally.
Like he's listening to a Journey CD.
Right. No, it's it's losers.
He's the reason we're not going to have a home.
Right. Oh,
kidding me?
It's even more disrespectful. It's like, at least let it be a shark.
Right.
Like, this is the guy that had to go to like law school in Bermuda. This is just kicking. This is making it. Yeah.
Actually, I have a degree in the Cayman Islands from families can't live here anymore.
Yeah, it was brutal, but that I literally didn't do any. It was like I felt like that was me being like, I was weaponizing laziness for the first time. I was mucking up I was gumming up the works of a horrible law firm by just because at the time I probably would have been a bad employee anywhere, but because I was so focused on stand up and I was out doing open mics all night, and I would commute to DC after work, an hour and a half, and then I would wake up. So I was like I would have been a bad employee. Yeah, but it was like when I was saving money to move to New York, so I was really in the zone. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I went to school for public policy. Like undergrad, I went on a public policy scholarship, but that guy feels like I don't even know who that 20-year-old me is just like a totally different person. I've been damaging my brain at just getting fucked up at shows and doing psychedelics for the last 10 years and doing edibles. So that was, I was smart at some point, but I gave all that up to really, really be good at dick jokes.
I mean, dude, you're definitely contributing more doing that than like, I don't know, like lobbying for like the Maltese government to be able to like sell like passports to like heroin traffickers so they can get EU citizenship or something. Trying to, do you think you'll stay in New York, or is this like burning you out on New York?
No, man, kind of the opposite. I think I realized like I really want to stay here. Like I think I realized the reason I moved here is because I love comedy. I love stand up. It's really, it's hard not to do it. It's hard, especially because you move here because it's the place with the most prestigious clubs, the most comedy. And
what are the most prestigious clubs right now?
I would say, the Stand, the Comedy Cellar, Gotham, New York Comedy Club. But also there's a lot, before all this, there was a ton of just great independent shows. I ran one with, my podcast bros at Come On Everybody. There's a great show at it's just complete coincidence, by the way.
That's good stuff.
But there's just so much stage time, and it's the kind of place where if you are the best comic, if you're the best in this scene, you get to do stand-up comedy, 20 times a week, if you want to. And I was that kind of guy, which
far out.
Yeah, that was what I was
20 times
striving.
A week.
If you wanted to, sure. If you're working at the good clubs on the weekends and they're putting you on every show, and then you work the other clubs, and you just bounce around doing 15-minute spots places, and that's the ultimate goal. I wasn't quite there, but it's like, and I just realized, like, yeah, you know what? I'm trying to stay. I'm going to see it through. I love it here. Even without stand up, I guess this has kind of made me realize, like, oh, I love this city. And maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if some of the shittiest people that live here moved back to Connecticut. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that, like, it sucks what the people that have to stay here are going through, but on some level, good riddance to the people that are like their dad's cottage. You know what
Do you
I mean?
think they're finally gone though? Or are they going to come back?
I don't know. They'll come back when everything is super back to normal, and it's going to be horrible again. Like we're going to have just figured out a cool in like a year. There's going to be like a sweet spot like 7 months from now where it rocks to be here. Right. And then everybody whose dad paid for them to go to NYU is coming back. You know what I mean? Like,
you know what it made me. I wish he wasn't like this because I love these guys, but I listened to Michael Imperioli and Steve Sciarippa have a Sopranos podcast, and it's I love it because of course like Imperioli is like so thoughtful, but sometimes he's just really ridiculous, but mainly very thoughtful, and Sciarippa just constantly goes. And they were on I heard a clip of them on Rogan, and Sciarippa was just like, exactly the type of, like, he's like, they had to change some of the stuff with the cops. Yeah. Stuff maybe they didn't have to change, just like, okay, dude, I don't even want to just be bacala for me. Of course. But he was like saying, like, as soon as de Blasio became mayor, he sold his place in Tribeca, and like he was anticipating, and I was just listening, and I was realizing that this man's terror is my like fantasy. I was listening, I was like, you actually think it's possible that like they might like reform the fucking police and these like assholes will leave this? Like, really? Like, yeah, because I'm pretty pessimistic, but you're giving me hope, Steve.
Yeah, he's like, all the chains are gonna leave New York. It's gonna be nothing but these dirty artists doing their own thing. Where am I gonna? I want to go to Chipotle. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
I moved to Vegas, and then I got back to New York, and I realized there was a Chipotle here. And that's what they might not like him, but that's what Giuliani did. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. Safe. I mean, I like the porn shops and whatnot, but it was a different time.
Give me the M&M store any day. I shed a tear when the M&M store came to New York. We made it, honey.
Do you listen to that podcast?
I'm waiting to do. I'm doing a full rewatch of The Sopranos over quarantine, and I'm about to start season 6. For some reason, I just want to go fresh without listening, and then once I'm done the most recent rewatch, I will be listening to the whole thing for sure.
So I won't try to. Well, first of all, I want to invite you, if you're ever up for it, once a month. For the patrons, me and some people like Waz and Nando are gonna do. We're gonna do a Sopranos rewatch because I love it. I've watched the thing so many fucking times. But Mike Racine too, if he'll come on. So yeah. If you ever want to do that, that would be fun to have you on.
Yeah, man, I'd love to.
I don't want to spoil the podcast, but they're just the dynamic of Sciarippa being like, like. Really fun. I mean, he's great. He is like a big-hearted, really likable guy. But it's just like occasionally, like Imperioli will be like, "Well, remember that was a cutback to the first scene, and the clock said 4:15." And then Sciarippa was like, "Yeah, exactly." So then, big pussy's coming on. He's a big hard on.
Yeah, no,
he's like bulldoze.
Totally, they're a hilarious match because. Imperioli is totally like an actor, first and foremost. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the beauty of The Sopranos. It's like it's incredibly like classically trained actors who happen to be, to perfectly portray mobsters, and it's half guys that wish they were in the mafia. And Sciarippa is totally one of those guys. He's like an old Vegas promoter. It's like Sciarippa is the kind of guy who fast forwards through all the therapy scenes. You know what I mean? He's like,
no, he likes the therapy.
Oh, he likes the therapy.
He loves it. Okay. He loves it. But it is that kind of like, so Tony's being a hard on, and Dr. Melfi, she gets it. She's she's got some fucking savvy to her that Imperioli would be like, well, that was the same time that he mentioned the dream in the last episode.
Right. Totally.
It's a lot of fun.
I love it. I can't wait. I honestly, I'm pacing myself on it's the Sopranos has to last me. I need Sopranos content constantly while we're locked down. So I'm pacing myself on that.
I'm amazed you haven't started yet. We actually found out that you listened to my friend Waza's show, Hoops Adjacent.
Yes,
which I love.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, I'm big. I didn't even realize Waz. I guess I was listening to like the basketball stuff he's done, an old basketball podcast in a lot of incarnations it's gone through. They're now at The Athletic, but yeah, I've been a fan of his for a while, for sure. Just pure basketball. And then I realized later on that, I didn't realize how much our politics aligned, which was pretty cool.
Waz is the best.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's on this show all the time, and then we do the Woke Bros. But I know, what do you think of how they're going to reopen basketball?
I think it's the closer we get to it. I mean, I didn't think it was a good idea to begin with, right? Like, I thought if they were going to bring basketball back, what they should have done was limit the amount of teams, gone straight to the playoffs. If you do anything, everyone recognizes that it's not ideal, but the whole goal is to get in and out as quickly as possible, finish the season so that there's a champion crown. But the goal is to, get safety, and then whatever money you can recoup, great. Unfortunately, clearly what the NBA has done is maximize the amount of money, which, I get on some level. I mean, it's a huge loss, whatever, but they're acting like it's, they just want to finish the season. They want to do this, but it's a little too, they've invited too many teams. There's too many people involved, and the location makes sense logistically, but Orange County, where Orlando is, their numbers just keep spiking. So I'm very, very hesitant about it. And, teams are shutting down their practice facilities. The Clippers had a staff member that tested positive, so they shut it down. The Bucks had a staff member. They shut it down. So some teams don't even have practice facilities in their home markets. Half the Brooklyn Nets have tested positive and aren't going to be in it. And so, they're playing with like 4 replacement players. And it's just, I thought they should have just done the best to do like a quick playoffs, give us something. But I'm very hesitant, and I'm scared it's going to be a disaster. I hope, knock on wood, it isn't. Knock on wood, nobody gets sick. Definitely nobody gets seriously sick. But I'm worried about it. I got to be honest.
All right, but so that's the worst case scenario, and I totally agree with you. And then just even way less important, but it matters if you follow the sport. Like, if you win this thing, that's a pretty big asterisk.
It is.
I mean,
yeah, there is an asterisk on it for sure. But I do think taking part. I mean, I'm of two minds of it, where it's like, I do think these players are making a real big sacrifice, and I do think in some ways it's like they are risking their health and maybe the health of their family for the game. I mean, that's sort of how I look at it. It's almost like they're doing a service, to the game to have a champion, because truly the safe thing here, if we're not thinking about money, we're not thinking about legacy, any of that stuff, is to cancel the season, especially in light of, just how much it's spreading in Florida and how much it doesn't seem like they have it under control. Seems to be that would be the, as how many players are testing positive. That would be the smart, especially a sport like basketball where there's no distancing. It's not baseball in theory, you know what I mean? You're breathing.
I get why like tennis is reopening. There's some sports,
golf.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It just my principle that applies like pretty much literally to, I can't think of a single situation where it doesn't apply, is never get in the way of somebody's check. So like,
right.
I guess, I mean, I don't know, like it's the player's choice and the union's involved with it, but it's like, how the fuck is that not going to spread?
Right. Absolutely. And it's the saddest. I mean, you talk about not getting in the way of anybody's check. The people that are the most harmed by this are are players who are on kind of like a shitty team that doesn't really have a chance. If your team didn't make there's 8 teams that didn't qualify, right? If you're on one of those 8 teams, you get paid the rest of your check no matter what. Now, all the teams that are in the play in Orlando, the remaining teams, if you're injured, you get paid your check no matter what. But if you decide to not play, you have the option not to play. But if you decide to not play, you don't get the rest of your check for that season. So those are the players that are like, look, I just don't want to do it for philosophical reasons. I'm scared of my family. You know, one player's kid has a respiratory issue. He is not playing. He gets docked his check, which to me seems crazy.
Disgusting.
To me seems crazy that you put those players. Those players are the only ones that have to make a tough financial decision, really. And that's why I think they invited way too many teams. You know, half the Wizards aren't playing. Bradley Beal, you know, their only good player, really, he's not playing. They already had a free agent who didn't want to risk injury. He's not playing, so it's just like the Wizards aren't playing. The Nets aren't. Half the Nets aren't playing, and then same thing with, like, you know, the Suns and the Spurs, like the teams that don't really have a shot at winning, who are only in here to pad the regular season games and help the NBA fulfill their contracts with the local markets, with the local TV markets. Those teams are pretty screwed, honestly. I mean, I think the teams that were in the hunt in the playoffs, they were going to play regardless. I think these guys are just competitors and they want to do it, but I feel for those other guys, man.
Dude, you could do this too.
Yeah.
You could do Cometown advice in sports.
Yeah.
100%.
I'd love to. Yeah.
That's flowing. Got to get you on. We're going to get you on with Waz.
I'd love to, man. I do basketball podcasts too. Pod Don't Lie. I'm
seriously.
I'm podding all the time. Yeah.
You're podding all the time. I thought I was podding all the time. It's fucking exhausting.
Bro, I had to do something when quarantine started. I started streaming I do basically 6 shows a week. So just to keep my mind, just to not be with my own thoughts, I'm either streaming or I'm an edible deep and watching a samurai movie. And my brain is either on or off. I've been watching Lone Wolf, the Lone Wolf and Cub series, which are really good, man.
I'm watching, like, but this is the problem, is like, I think of the things that I do to zone out, and I'm like, literally, I do watch movies, and I'm like watching like documentaries about the IRA on YouTube. What's wrong?
You can't do that, dude.
Nah, it's just what it is. It's just,
you gotta watch the dumbest shit of all time.
I can't resist it. Well, no, I like the, but my barrier with dumb shit is like any other barrier. Like, I love dumb shit if it's the right dumb shit. I mean, honestly, your podcast is probably some of the only dumb shit that I can connect to right now.
Exactly. That's high praise, by the way. Thank you.
Oh,
we want to be the best dumb shit there is.
The best. No, I think you and Racine are like the only. I like it. I like it. It's definitely. The thing, I won't go into details of it, but
of course,
the way I got flipped on your show was somebody sent me the Jordan Peterson riff, and I was walking around, just like taking my phone out. It was like a YouTube clip, just like
right,
and again,
right, yep, yeah.
I think I'm just gonna play that again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's hilarious. He's the best. Speedy recovery from being addicted to pills, Jordan, and eating only beef. It's funny for a guy that only eats steak and does a bunch of pills. He sucks. You know, you'd think that guy's cooler. You think that's a guy? That's like some big fat guy on a grill eating ribeyes, just taking Vicodin. But no, it's some pseudo intellectual.
You know what he should be like is I watched on Netflix. This is actually, I don't know, it's not exactly dumb, but it's just bizarre. There's this movie called The Odessa Connection.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually insanely stupid. It's like this Russian mob associate who's literally named Tarzan.
Hell yeah.
Who goes to Tampa and basically, like, they're buying planes for the Cali cartel from the Soviet Union as it's collapsing. And you can just go to the Soviet Union and just literally, like,
just get planes. They
have a deal to buy a nuclear submarine for the cartel. Like, that's just like, and it's there, it's documented. Like, the FBI case handlers are there and everything. And Tarzan, you know, whatever, sure, this dude, like, has done some very bad shit, but he is just like he is steaks and Vicodin.
Right.
He's just like, everything is great. He's just like, and then I meet Michael and he has Maserati dealership and he's a good looking guy.
Right.
And he has an idea and we
That's
do.
right.
And by the way, it's like, isn't that like the whole mind? Like that mindset's awesome. And is it like, that's where you should be going. Like there's all this like gnashing of teeth of like, clean your room. It's like, no, just like be like Tarzan.
Totally. Do not read. First of all, stop reading.
Stop reading.
That guy can't read. There's something that's happened to his brain.
No, he writes children's books now.
That rocks.
No, he's got this crazy combination of being like an actual sociopath and then just like this childlike, and he's just like, and then rat on me, and you know, I was a heart.
Poor Tarzan. I love that.
Seriously.
That's definitely a European thing. Anybody with long hair. There's a couple Greek Tarzans that I know.
Do you know Tarzans growing up?
I knew a guy named, they called him Tarzan because he had long hair and he cleaned he was a window cleaner, so he'd be climbing up and down. You know, he's high up there. That's hence the twofold name. He's swinging up by the buildings and he's got long hair. So yeah.
Stop.
I wonder what Tarzan's up to these days.
I think Tarzan is in Israel. He has immunity and he's writing children's books.
Good for him, man.
I'm telling you, dude, this documentary's crazy. They even have this like Cuban guy who I actually looked it up. He ended up getting arrested after the documentary came out, but he did shit like leave Miami and write postcards to the FBI agents that were surveilling him. Like, hey guys, I'm here. I'm drinking a pina colada, but I don't see you.
That's the best. The cat and mouse game.
Yes. Just like when you're sitting like, and you realize like, we're always just 12 because this is
I love it.
Awesome. Stop. I want it.
Yes.
We're going to take a break in a few minutes. Will you spend a little bit of the post game with us because we've got some advice questions for you.
Let's do some advice, baby.
Let's take one advice question though before we go to the post game, and I'll just start with this is a super earnest one.
Okay. I can do earnest.
All right. Does Stav have any strategies I should use as I start interviewing for teaching jobs?
Oh wow, teaching jobs.
Yeah.
Interesting. I used to be a tutor in Baltimore City. I worked in an after-school program in Baltimore, and that job was when I realized like comedy is what it is, because it was like you had to choose between you can half-ass a job at like as a paralegal for a horrible company, right? But you can't half-ass teaching children. You know what I mean? I don't want somebody's future to be ruined because I was hungover, you know?
Right. There's more stakes.
I would say don't do open mics. I would say that's number one. Don't do open mic comedy. As a teacher though, I don't know, man. I think just being a teacher is enough do people even want to be teachers anymore? The fact that you're interviewing right now.
I think this person does clearly want to be a teacher.
Right. So what I'm saying is your desire for being a teacher, that's got to put you at the top of the list already. Geez, bro, I haven't had a real job in so long. I would say, what are you asking me for, man? I don't have a tooth. I don't know. I don't know what this. I mean, I remember what cool teachers were like, but you know, it's the same as interviewing in general. I would say, lie.
Right.
Just absolutely present the best version of yourself. The other thing is, if you're the person who wants to be a teacher, you're probably selfless. You're probably honest to a fault. Right. So fight that. Think in the interview, do a little bit of your inner Wall Street bro. You know what I mean? Have a little bit of that unearned confidence, because you're probably a very thoughtful person who's not used to that. So don't be afraid to lie about who you are for the betterment of those children that you're going to teach, because you're going to be a good teacher. So that's what I would say. I would say
lie. And I'm actually just related to that. I want to do just a follow-up that this might apply to everybody doing interviews. Every employer, to the point where it's like a joke in movies now, they're very used to what's a flaw? Oh, I work too hard. I take the project too seriously, and sometimes blah, 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 blah. What is an actual good answer too. Like, it's obviously still going to be a lie, of course,
right?
But
right,
it's just not going to be the same thing that they've heard thousands of times before.
A good answer to what? Yeah.
So, like, what's your weakness that isn't? Oh, my weakness is I work too hard.
Right. I would say, especially if you're a teacher, you're probably I think the answer to that is you gotta hit them with something technical. You know what I mean? Like something like, oh, you know, I'm not as, I really need to brush up on my long division, but I've taken online classes and I'm doing continuing education, but my strengths are in, you know, this area, but I've already taken steps. You want to say a flaw and then tell them the steps that you've taken to rectify it already. Would be sort of my advice. I was great at interviewing. There was always like a 3-week period where whoever hired me, like at first they're like, I guess he's just kind of just getting a slow start. And then like about a month in, they're like, I've been duped. I'm just the guy I interviewed is never showing up. This is a different guy. So
you pulled out. Did you roll up with like a fake tooth?
Yeah.
Like, thank you. Looking forward to starting.
Yeah. Thanks, I was wearing a toupee.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a suit, but it like tears off, and I'm wearing a tracksuit underneath. You know, that's.
I wear a lot of Adidas. Is Adidas your favorite or Puma?
I'm definitely an Adidas guy. I like to switch it up with some Puma. But you know what? I'm agnostic when it comes to. I like all brands when it comes to the tracksuit. You know,
that's a good. I like that. That's a message that more people in these political spheres need to hear. I like all brands.
My favorite thing is brands.
Yeah,
I think we can look to brands to save us. I don't know if you've seen, but Doritos they're gay now, so they did a color, so it's solved. Homophobia is over.
Doritos took care of homophobia. McDonald's is covering racism.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Northrop Grumman. They got ladies designing
bombs
now.
Yeah,
so we're doing good, baby.
Do not worry. That Yemeni school bus bombing was designed by a woman.
I heard Blackwater wants some girl boss mercenaries too. So everything is coming up thanks to the brands.
Absolutely, the brands will save us. All right, brother. So we'll take a quick break. We'll get you back you'll spend a little bit in the post game. We got some more advice questions for you.
Sounds good.
Dude, I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Everybody check out Cometown. What else do you want to plug, Stavi?
The advice show that I've started on Twitch every Friday, 6:00, called Stavi Solves Your Problem. It's live on Twitch, and it's also on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/StaviBaby. And Stavi Baby on all the Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff.
Awesome.
But the advice show is what I'm really, really doing. Kind of pouring that's my quarantine project. So we'd love for people to check that out.
All right. Well, we'll do some of that in the post game. All right, everybody. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. Thank you, Vijay Prashad. People got really fixated on you plugging your appearance as a debate with Noam Chomsky. Loop back to that in the post game. Become a patron, patreon.com/TMBS. Get the whole thing. Spread the word. Be good to yourself. Be good to other people. Stay safe. Stay strong. Be well. Peace and love. See you in the post game in about 10 minutes, people.